Hi, this is Andrew, and you're listening to Knott, a podcast. This is episode 4. I'm recording in mid to late January during a really cold and depressing week in Florida. The weather's been unusual for sure. It's been cloudy and rainy and wet and super cold. I guess that the weather's kind of matched the mood with everything going on in the world, in the country. It's kind of like dreary and gray and borderline apocalyptic. But I went to Wawa one morning when it was really cold the other day, and everybody was like super chatty, which is weird because nobody ever talks. They just get their coffee and move on. But when it's cold, like the only thing anybody talks about here is the weather. So it's like how cold it is, and then somebody in the store was like, maybe we should all move to Colorado. I heard they have skiing there. I was like, I don't know, guys. I don't know if we should go that far, but whatever you need to do, I guess. So the other day, on the really cold day, I made a soup, which, as one does. And then I was at the grocery store and I got this urge to grab a box of cream of wheat, which is a food I haven't had in probably 15 years, 20 years. But I used to have it as a kid. I remember having it as a kid on cold days. So I was like, I'm going to try it. And I ate it right when I got home. Still holds up. That was a pleasant surprise. The maple brown sugar flavor with a little bit of milk and butter on it. So anyway, to distract myself from the weather and the news and all that, I've been thinking a lot about my writing and what I'm doing with it, and the podcast or whatever, and the past and what I did in the past and what I'm going to do next. And I was trying to decide on stories to read for the podcast, and I started looking through my first book, which was Fatherhood: Dispatches from the Early Years, that I self-published in 2016, which was like a collection of essays and humor pieces about parenting and stuff that I'd written on my blog and for different publications. And I was thinking about how weird that whole experience was of making that book. Because like people would be like, wow, you wrote a whole book. And I was always like to myself thinking, no, not really. I mean, I just pieced these things together that I'd written, on the internet, called it a book. And it was like that distinction mattered to me somehow. And to everybody else, it didn't, because it was like, you wrote a book, that's the end. I think that's how it kind of goes when you're writing or creating art in some way. As the person doing the writing or the creation, you think about it way more than anyone else does. Anyone who ever reads it or consumes it. I guess that might not be true for like someone who makes something super popular that has like really rabid fans, but for most people, like me, who make unpopular writing or content or whatever. So now when I'm thinking about like what story should I read on here or what should I write next, or I always have to remind myself that like it doesn't matter that much because nobody else is going to care as much as I do about it. So you just gotta do whatever I want. I think like for the podcast, I'm like, should I read newer stories, like the same ones I'm sharing in written form, or will people get bored with that? Or should I share older ones? Does that make sense? Do I have to do them in a certain order? But like the reality is like no one cares. Like I'm the only one that cares. So, that's a little bit demoralizing, but also extremely freeing, I think, if you're writing or making something. If you remind yourself, no one cares about it as much as I do. So you don't have to overthink it. You can still overthink it. That's probably what I would do anyway, but then you just move on. That's my classic move. But it can really unlock things, I think. It allows you to just actually do them, like making this, whatever this is, or writing another newsletter or writing another book if I ever do that. So anyway, that's my motivational speech, such as it is. And now I'm going to share, I did pick out a story from my book that I realized I didn't remember at all, that it's like a combination of two pieces. One that I wrote on my original blog way back, like probably 2009 or 10, before I had kids. And then a second piece when my boys were probably like a baby and 3 years old or something. I guess for the book, I pieced them together and made it into one piece, which was pretty ambitious of me. I was pretty proud of myself for doing that. I thought I just copied everything into the book. So, I guess I really did make a book. But anyway, this piece is about rescuing dogs. Probably not the way you're thinking, but you'll find out. Anyway, this is a super old piece, and actually, one of my writing friends, Shannon Carpenter, said he listens to my stories, listens to the podcast as his pre-bedtime routine. So, and he wanted to hear some old stuff from the vault. So this is for you, Shannon, and sleep well. This week's story is called Rescuing Dogs is My Claim to Fame. Sometimes writing takes backseat to heroism. I like to write, but sometimes other things get in the way, like rescuing dogs. In fact, I would go so far as to say that rescuing dogs is one thing I'm really known for. No big deal. It's just something I do. I mean, I've done it twice, and perhaps rescuing isn't exactly the right word, but it all depends on how you look at it. It's not that I'm adopting a bunch of dogs from shelters. It's more that I saved them from immediate peril. Twice. Interesting thing is that the first of these dog rescue missions occurred before I had kids, and the second one occurred after my boys were in the picture. Thus, it's clear that dog rescuing even transcends my parenting, which is a tough bar to clear. My first dog wrangling rodeo took place on a normal evening in early September. The air was still hot and muggy, even as the sun was ready to set. In other words, incessant Florida summer. I'd just finished rereading some of my articles, cracking myself up all over again. I was about to change into my robe and slippers and curl up with a small chihuahua and a good book. Before doing that, I was cleaning up a few final odds and ends. I headed out to the garage to toss a couple of empty fig containers into the recycling bin. When I opened the door to the dark garage, I noticed there was a dog's head in the doorway. My first thought was, ah! So I slammed the door. Then I thought, that's odd, there's not usually a dog's head there. So I opened the door back up, and sure enough, a mid-sized husky-type dog was staring back at me. To make a kind of medium-length story short, neither my wife nor I had ever seen this animal before, so we were a bit at a loss. She seemed quite exhausted, the dog that is, so we gave her some food and water, which she seemed to enjoy. We contemplated consulting the talkative guy down the street who walked a poodle and seemed to know every dog in the neighborhood, as my wife had the pleasure of learning firsthand in a conversation a few months prior. However, because it was kind of late, we just held our ground. Finally, we heard shouts from just outside our neighborhood. Michelle tracked down the dog's caretaker, who was searching frantically for Marshmallow. In the meantime, I had taken Marsh inside our house to get some food and water. This turned out to be kind of exciting, mainly because one of our chihuahuas, Zoe, tried to eat her face. In the end, the story had a happy ending as Marshmallow was reunited with her family, which included a dog named Coco. Marshmallow and Coco. Awesome. Second time around, my two sons and I had just left my parents' house when we passed a pickup truck going in the other direction. When we were about even with the truck, I noticed a small dog was attempting to throw itself out of the truck bed. I looked in the side mirror after we passed by, and yes, confirmed, there it was, a dachshund toppling comically over the edge of the truck, flailing and flipping on its back as it fell to the road. The dog was clearly a bit stunned and took a second to gather himself before stumbling to his feet and hobbling to the sidewalk. I'm not sure, but I think he glanced around to ensure no one had seen his remarkably ungraceful tumble. At least, if I were in his position, that is what I would have done. The truck didn't stop and continued to the very end of the dead-end street before turning into a driveway. I stopped our car, backed up, got out. It was time for me to shine. I approached the dog cautiously. He seemed nice enough and was trembling a little. I offered him the back of my hand and he sniffed. I then picked him up carefully. I'm quite familiar with finicky chihuahuas, so an injured dachshund was a piece of cake. I climbed back into the car with the dog on my lap. One of my sons asked from the back seat, "What's that dog doing in here?" Can't get anything by that guy. I turned the car around and headed toward the end of the street where the truck had gone. The truck was headed back my way by the time we had turned around. I honked to flag it down and handed over the dog. The lady said they had just found it, actually, but were planning to keep it. Likely story. They thanked me profusely. I'm not one to brag, but their gratitude was well earned. Sure, the street wasn't that long, but it was moderately long. There are shorter, dead-end streets out there. And yes, the dog wasn't visibly injured, and he was just standing there on the sidewalk in a relatively safe position, showing no signs of running away. And okay, I will concede that the lady would have been back to get him in about 1 minute. But still, considering all that, let's not understate my level of heroism. I could have easily kept driving, and, well, everything would have turned out about the same. Rescuing dogs. It's just what I do. But how, you might be thinking, did this dog rescue take up so much of my time as I suggested earlier? In other words, how did it get in the way of my writing? Good questions. While the rescue took perhaps 3 minutes, my son's questions lasted about 3 days. Son, what happened? Me. A dog jumped out of a pickup truck. Where'd the dog come from? This is the dog that jumped out of the truck. What's a pickup truck? It's a type of car that is particularly popular in many parts of Florida, including the part where we live. What does it pick up? Dogs. What's Florida? The state where freedom rings, LOL. How did it jump out? The back of the truck is open. It jumped over the side. No, tell me how it jumped out. Like this. Dog jumping out of truck, hand motions. Why was it open? Because that's how pickup trucks are. Why? See what I mean? I'm still tired, but many years later, I have recovered enough to try to write, well, a story about rescuing dogs. You just never know where life will take you. Thanks for listening to Knott, a podcast. Catch you next time.